have a point there. I'm willing to accept that. What I'm saying is, I'm willing to accept that there may be similarity, not that Quran borrowed from Aristotle. My contention is that the specific stages described in the Quran, how does that match with what Aristotle said? I mean, those stages are quite peculiar to the Quran. Quran is quite unique in describing those stages because the bones are formed first and then the muscles, and this is how would a desert nomad know that?
Right now I'm laughing at this idea that this is a specific description of embryology. Yes, bones develop first, then muscles.
I agree, it's general. No, I agree with you. It's general.
This is something that you can infer just by rational thought about embryology. You can also just determine this by looking at fetuses from different animals. You can look
by
at
desecration.
Yes.
Why don't we get something more specific? I talked about geology, right? And how can it fathom? How can anyone illiterate, where the science was counter to that time, right? How can
this is something counter to say that mountains have roots is.
And they have a function that we understand that is in line with isostasy according to geologists today. That to me is quite phenomenal.
But once again, you've equated these really crude, primitive guesses that you find in the Quran with the specific details of science.
Okay, let me tell you why they're not crude. The reason not crude is that the Quranic science, and this would be good for everyone to listen, is that we have the Quran is probably the only religious book that gives you the tools to interpret it, right? So what the Quran says is you take general principles in the Quran, general values or general statements, and you refer them to specific ones related to the same topic. So in normal literature and linguistics, it's called inter and intratextuality, okay? So when we take general statements, we can make them specific with the Arabic language used in the Quran itself. So it's not crude from that perspective, and we have a scope of interpretation, because the classical Arabic dictionaries were preserved, and we have a scope of meaning. So when we have the scope of meaning, we know that these things are quite specific. Significantly, even when the Quran says that the universe is expanding, for example, there's the word here, expanding, which actually means expanding in the past or expanding in the future. There is a scope of interpretation, do you see? So the interesting thing is, we should maybe...
It's not interesting. You're really boring. This is the same...
Is that an atheist cop-out, maybe?
No, this is the same story we get from Jewish scholars, from Christian scholars. They do exactly the same thing.
Well, I'm not Jewish or Christian, I'm Muslim, and we're talking about specific issues.
It's standard religious analysis.
Yeah, but Professor Myers, wouldn't you think it would be highly arrogant of me if I said to you, what you're saying is typical atheists, what they say, they change the subject, they go to history and they say that you're the same as the Jews, you're the same as the Christians, and throw all these outdated cliches. Would you appreciate me doing that?
Go ahead.
But I wouldn't. Do you know why? Do you know why I wouldn't do that? Because I really want to engage with you. I really want to engage with you, that's why.
But no, you do not.
Of course I do.
You want to parrot dogma at me and have me accept it.
I'm actually accepting a lot of your assumptions and premises. I don't have a problem with that.
Well, you did also try to assert and project faith onto him.
Yes.
And
well, he said it was an assumption. That's why.
Okay, and you can make an assumption based on evidence. Faith
but he said he had no evidence
based on no evidence.
No, well, we've been talking quite evidentially.
I do have evidence.
Okay,
that's what I'm telling you. That when, for instance, when we look at Aristotle's words, when we look at the descriptions of the Quran, we see a correspondence.
Well, you haven't shown us any correspondence.
Yeah, that's the point. That's just a statement.
You haven't shown us. This is a statement. Aristotle is like the Quran. How? How?
I'm like Einstein, everyone.
Aristotle also describes the emergence of bones and muscle.
Right.
In sequence.
Right.
Okay.
And it's like the Quran.
And it's like the Quran.
Does Aristotle say the bones come first and then the flesh and the muscles? Does he say that? Are you sure?
Anybody that works.
I'll let you think about this.
Well,
anyone that works in livestock.
I'm not saying it. Can you tell?
Are you sure? Is that what the Quran specifically says?
Absolutely. This is exactly what the Quran says. Chapter 23.
Because you just demonstrated the Quran is wrong.
Yeah, but Professor Myers.
That's not what happens.
Well, this is what the embryologists are telling us.
This is exactly
what the embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not.
Embryologists. Let me tell you what Keith Moore said. I mean, you can disagree with him.
He doesn't like Keith Moore.
I don't know why you don't. What he said on the page number 364A of his book, The Human Embryo, that in the 7th week the bones are formed, and immediately after that the flesh is formed, and the bones are clothed with flesh. Keith Moore is wrong. He's an embryologist. This is his field.
It's my field too. I know he's wrong.
You're an embryologist?
Yes.
Oh, great! Wow! That's news to me. Okay.
So that's wrong, because what happens first is you have differentiation of mesoderm.
Right.
that within the mesoderm you have segregation into things like embryonic mesenchyme, and then you have these cartilaginous centers that will form bone.
Right.
And these are forming simultaneously with each other.
Right. Simultaneously.
Yes.
Even if that's the case, the Quran is right, because thumma is very, even if that's the case, linguistically the Quran is right. Thumma literally can in Arabic language means things happening simultaneously.
Parallel as well.
Yes.
But that's besides the
I
point.
have a question.
Wait,
for you.
let me read it. Professor Myers, I think what's interesting, even if you're right, that means we would have to assume that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing upon him, actually used to go and look into biology. He was a biologist. He would actually go and investigate things about mountains.
He was an astronomer.
He must have had a library of an Alexandrian magnitude. So even when you make these assumptions, it's still problematic.
He was a geologist?
No, because this is what I've been telling you.
Sure.
There are no embryological details of any consequence in the Quran.
Well,
This is not stuff.
the details are not there. You're right. You're right.
This
the
is not
details are
stuff
there.
that requires a huge library to figure out. This requires a passing acquaintance with general knowledge about the primitive state of biology at the time.
That's a fair point. Are you willing to accept now that Muhammad possibly had general knowledge about astronomy, hieroglyphics? He had knowledge of, for example, geology.
Yep.
He's talking about isostasis, something about isostasis. Okay, so he must have been going around studying with some scholars in Arabia. He wasn't a shepherd. He was a very literate man.
The
he
intellectual
was
of the time.
teaching in a university. He was an intellect, and all those people who believed in it at the time, there must have been blind bunch of bigots, and they just followed him just for the sake of it, just to have a drink.
No, I've been saying quite the opposite. I'm saying that he's a man of his times, that he was part of a culture,
Right.
that the Arabs of that time were not quite as primitive and dogmatic and ignorant as you seem
Well,
to think.
it depends what books you're reading, sir, because this is my
saying they had-
I'm a historian from the University of London, and I'll refer you to the books of Irfan Shahid, who's an authority in this field, pre-Islamic Arabia, and he states that Arabs at the time were a primitive society.
Yes.
And now you're saying yes.
Well, no, I agree. They were.
They were primitive in the sense they were not.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
There was no Arabic language
you-
written down at the time.
On the one hand, you are complaining that there was this detailed, wonderful science in the Quran
Yes.
that he could only have learned from, revelation.
Sure.
And I'm saying that no, that what we find in the Quran is an extremely primitive science that was nothing more than the common man could have learned from, general interactions with learning society at the time.
Like mountain roots as well. How would they even know that? It was not even knowledge at that time.
Mountain roots. What do you do again? It's all it's saying is that you've got this mountain that's going up here, and there's a lot of depth beneath it.
And then they would understand the function of that as well.
The function.
It is.
The function of the Quran is to anchor the crust and things like, and that's not the case. That's again wrong.
It's not to anchor the crust at all.
What is it for?
It's actually to, from my knowledge, it's actually to, like Archimedes' fulcrum point. Actually, that's what isostasis comes from. It's like another term to discuss the Archimedes' fulcrum point, and that's what it's there for.
I think the really sad thing here is you're missing the enormous picture to focus on the pixel.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. The enormous picture is that you have something that only communicates with the least credible possible proponent. And he wants you to believe impossible nonsense for no reason. And only if you believe impossible nonsense for no reason will you be saved. And you will get unimaginable rewards if you believe whatever the priests are selling. And you will suffer a fate worse than death if you don't buy into their nonsense.
That's not true. That's quite a sexy way of looking at it, I think.
A sexy way to look at it.
I mean, well,
There's a language barrier here.
You're all about the sexy way.
no, you sexed it up slightly, right? Because actually, Professor, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
but
Professor Myers. What I discussed with Professor Myers was like actually the Quran is quite opposite to that. It's not a text that says believe just because I say so.
Okay, then
It actually tells you to, for example, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. In Arabic it says, do you not use your mind, your intellect? So
Then let me
it's
clarify.
telling you and trying to evoke thinking. You see?
I just want to make sure we don't have a language barrier. So when I said that you are punished for not believing, you're saying that I'm wrong, that in your religion you are not punished simply for not believing.
No, you're right, but it's bigger than that. It's an existential question.
So I was right.
No,
okay.
well,
What else am I wrong about?
Well, I think the way we connect with each other is not by having yes or no answers, but having a conversation, right? So it's an existential question. For example, see,
hold on just a second. I want you to think for a moment about the creator of the entire universe.
Yeah.
Doesn't give a rat's ass whether you do anything good or bad in your life. All that matters, the sole criteria, is that you are gullible enough to follow the story of the least credible illiterate proponent you can follow. That's the sole criteria, and that's all.
No, that's not true.
Okay,
There's
if
two
that's
things.
not it, then an
explain to you?
unbeliever could be saved. An unbeliever would not go to hell.
Yeah, that's true.
If all unbelievers go to hell, then the sole criteria is gullibility.
Let me give you an example. First and foremost, what we say is that the Quran says we do not punish anyone until they have given the message. And there is another concept in the Quran called Dalil Burhan, which means conclusive evidence that you require to be conclusive. Now the second thing is because the message is good for you. That's why. And we've seen that in history. So no,
Now I can't.
well, maybe no. There's another point.
Let's not get
One
stampeded.
second. One second.
Just one at a time.
No stampedes. Okay. The other point is an existential question because we believe in Islam of this philosophical principle called the fitra. Fitra means the innate disposition, and we believe that human beings have been created with the innate disposition to acknowledge oneness. Okay, it's a spiritual concept, the oneness of God. And what we say is when we deny ourselves, that's why the question who you are is an existential question in the Quran. Saying, who are you? Are you just a product of American society? Are you a product of capitalism? Are you a product of communism? Are you a product of the system? Are you a product of your parents? If you are, then who are you? You're just like a social biological robot that someone types in the code and you just act in accordance. And the Quran says, don't do that. Think about your reality. And it says, are you just going to follow your forefathers? And it says, literally, even if they were based on no knowledge, it's an existential question. And from that we say, if you don't know who you are, then you're just rejecting yourself. And God says in the Quran that to deny God or to reject God from that innate disposition perspective is like denying your own self.
Okay.
So the point I'm trying to say is it is an existential question, and that's why it's useful to always have this kind of good discussions all the time.
Okay. Now, my primary interest is in phylogenetics. So when I go to deny myself, I would have to deny that I am an evolved ape. That's what I am. That's what we all are.
Okay.
The Quran, so far as I know, in denying evolution, denies itself. And you are telling me that what I have to instead adopt...
It doesn't deny all principles of
The
evolution.
Quran doesn't talk about evolution.
Regardless, what you're telling me, it talks about Adam and Eve and all of this, and the great flood that we know didn't happen and all of that. But apart from all that, you're asking me to accept this uber-galactic super being.
Well, the Quran doesn't talk about the great flood either.
Okay. Okay. Just to clarify, the important point is you're asking me to accept this uber-galactic super being, of which we have no evidence at all, from a system of religion which has so far only produced failure in every predictable sense. And you want me to believe that this thing will punish me simply for not believing, and it wants me to believe the least credible people and the most improbable stories, and I'll be punished if I don't. How is that not a criteria of gullibility?
Well, there's two assumptions here. First and foremost, there's this galactic being that doesn't exist. I would deny that. I think there's very good reasons to believe that a divine exists. I could articulate them for you.
I would love to see
you can read this book. You'll discover it's bullshit all the way through.
Professor Myers, because we really want to listen to Miriam Namazi because she has outdated cliches about the Sharia, right? Especially when she talks about rape using four witnesses. That's nowhere in the Sharia. That's not at all. Testimony is
the
enough.
booklet, I just read a booklet.
It's a joke.
It's
But
a
anyway,
joke.
we'll listen to that. The thing is, if we pay for your ticket to come down to London, would you have an intellectual dialogue with us with a non-Muslim coordinator?
An intellectual dialogue with you about what?
Or what we've been just doing so far? Would you do that?
I'll be around. You might
I'll
be
tell you
able
what,
to. Yeah.
I'll give you a forum.
Cool.
Okay? We'll book you on the Magic Sandwich Show.
What is that?
Magic Sandwich Show.
Yeah, we'll
What
have
do
you
you
on the
think of
Magic
that?
Sandwich.
Is that a real show?
Yeah, it's a real show.
Can I get a sandwich?
And if you do, it'll cure you of cancer.
Only if it's halal meat, right?
Certainly.
So, anyway, good to see you, Professor.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you so much for your time. Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The show goes on.